So he had been called to help to coach. Called to help to coach. He was basically called to be like an assistant coach. Hi guys, welcome back to my booktube channel. My name is Amie. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're not new here, if you're part of the 29 people who watched my previous video or the 6 people who commented, I just want to start by saying thank you so much. I fully posted that video not thinking that anybody would watch it. And to have woken up to see a couple of comments as well as a few more views, honestly, I am blown away. So thank you so much for supporting if you have supported my channel. And thank you so much for all your kind words. I really appreciate it. I honestly feel like I probably was lucky enough to land in the algorithm of some of the kindest people ever. And that is what your messages reflect. I actually have not known what to do with myself for the last like 8 days because I've been blown away by the fact that people have watched my video and they've taken the time to also comment, and it really means the entire world. So yeah, thank you so much for your support. I deeply appreciate it. So I do know that I mentioned in my last video that I was going to edit the original video that I had shot and then try to upload it. That one featured all my favorite books from last year. However, I've come to the conclusion that I do not like that video at all. I tried very much to go back and like start again, and it just wasn't clicking. So then I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna make a new video, a fresh take, and then obviously see how we can progress from there. I'm going to be talking about everything I read in January and February, and hopefully now that we're in March, it's about time to post it. And then hopefully I can work on building up that steady momentum. Maybe talking about my favorite books of last year in another video sometime soon. That original video, also there was a clip missing and I just felt it was quite disjointed and I just was not about. I was like, you know what? It wasn't going to be perfect, guaranteed. But that video was, I think it was particularly abysmal. So I'm just going to scrap it and move on with my life. Before we start, I wanted to give a bit of background as to how I found myself here, because once I start talking about the books that I've read, you'll see a very clear theme. And so I wanted to give a bit of background as to how I found myself here. Basically, last year I was in a reading slump and I was just getting really tired of all the romances that I was reading. They just really seemed very similar. And there is a way the female protagonists of romance books are written that I was just getting really tired of. It felt like reading the same stories again and again and again. And so I had been watching a video of Hannah's, or the Clockwork Reader, and she's extremely popular. So if you're on here and you're watching this video, you probably know exactly who she is. And I was watching one of her videos and she talked about how one of her favorite romance books of all time was this book called The Charm Offensive. And I was like, I've never heard of that before. It's not really a book that you would hear all the popular like booktubers talk about. And at the time, I was probably reading largely what really popular booktubers talk about, which, and those books tend to be, especially with romance, they tend to be romances that feature a man and a woman and mostly a white one. And so this was a different, she was talking about romance between two men, and then one was Indian and then the other one was white. So it was an interracial romance. And I was like, I mean, if she's saying it's one of the best books she's ever read, surely I have to go and read it. So I did. It turns out it's one of the best books I've ever read. I was shocked by how much it moved me, because at the time I had been feeling quite down and not very, I don't know how I would describe it, almost like quite emotionally subdued. So nothing was really triggering any kind of emotion for me. I was just kind of like neutral about many things. And so I picked this book up and it made me feel so many things. It truly is one of my favorite books of all time, not just in terms of like romances. It's such a beautifully written book. And maybe another time I'll get into reviewing the book. But what that did for me was open my sort of search history into other queer romances. And from there, I found Cat Sebastian, who you might know. I found KJ Charles. And then from there, I got into hockey romance, which apparently is this huge subgenre that I knew absolutely nothing about. And I was like, where have I been? It's actually crazy that I'm just now discovering hockey queer romance. So because I started reading all these queer romances, I then stumbled upon the Game Changers series by Rachel Reed, which was amazing. And then I discovered Heated Rivalry and The Long Game, which are apparently two of the most popular hockey romances out there. And to say I was blown away would be an understatement. These are some of the best books I've ever read. And to think that it's not even to think that I could have gone the rest of my life without discovering them almost seems unfathomable. But here we are. And reading all these books have led me to the past two reading months for me, because obviously when you get a certain book from Amazon, they recommend, quite similar books. So that's how I've landed here. Starting all the way from The Charm Offensive, going all the way to reading a bunch of Cat Sebastian books that I thoroughly enjoyed. I read a couple from KJ Charles. I didn't particularly find anything I loved, but I wasn't too fussed about that because I didn't read a lot. I ended up just going back to reread the Cat Sebastian books, and then I discovered the Game Changers, which I love, particularly The Long Game and Heated Rivalry, Shane and Ilya's books. By the way, quality couple. If you have not read those books, I highly recommend. And so I decided in January that I was going to get the Kindle unlimited subscription just so I could read a bunch of books for basically one price and then see what I could discover. And so we're now going to do a deep dive into all the books that I've read as a result of discovering this amazing subgenre, in hopes that somebody else has read them and we can talk about it, because I don't know anybody in real life that has read these books. So it would be nice to connect with people. And obviously, if these are not books that maybe you could pick it up. Maybe I could recommend something new that you might not have discovered or tried yet. So let's get into it. January was quite a chaotic month for me because I started in a new job, and I'm sure you all know what that's like. It's a completely different industry than the one I had previously worked in. So it was a lot to get used to. So January, I took it very easy, January and February, and I was just basically trying to find things that I really enjoyed. I DNF'd a few things, but I think I just really want to talk about the things that I enjoyed. In January, I discovered the SCU Hockey series. And for whatever reason, I started with not these books are in a series. So while you do see previous characters, they can be read as standalone. So I read the third book first, and that was called Goal Lines and First Times, and it's about Seth and Cohen. So Cohen is a hockey player on this university's team, and Seth is the brother of the previous captain who has then moved on to play professional hockey. So he was on the team and then he moved on. This book was really sweet. I think I rated it. Let me have a look. I rated it 4 star. Well, I really do think it should be a 3 star because I don't remember a lot of it, but I do remember enjoying it. It was more so, it's a book of self discovery, really, because for one, they were both looking for labels that would fit them. So with Cohen, he basically thought he was straight. And apparently in the book right before, it was like a running joke with his teammates, and he was like, "Oh yeah, it's completely normal to kiss a guy, right?" And then they were like, "Not really. You might want to explore that." So basically, he's trying to see if his feelings for his best friend was a one-off or he's actually like queer. And then with Seth is also trying to figure out his own sexuality as well. So they go on dating apps, and that's how they meet when they start talking. And this book was really good in terms of discovery. Like, if you enjoy a book of self discovery, people discovering what they are and who they are, it's a really good book. But even if you're going through something like that, it's a really good book to read, because what I particularly liked is how they solved their problems. It was very mature. Because I feel with a lot of romance books, there's a lot of like miscommunication that can be at times very irritating. But with this one, they kind of solved all their issues rather quickly and in a very mature way, and they were properly acknowledged. And I love that about the book. I love the fact that they formed a connection without ever meeting, even though there were times that they would like pass each other because obviously they're in the same university. And so I loved that. It was very funny. There are many times I did laugh out loud because the author has a sense of humor that I quite enjoy in the books. I rated it a 4 star. I don't know if it's a 4 star. I think it might be 3.5. Maybe one day I will discuss my rating system because even I'm confused by it at times. I think the couple worked for me because they had amazing banter and they complemented each other very well. There was chemistry even before they met, which is amazing because I feel like it's not very easy to establish chemistry between characters that are not physically interacting with each other. So there was chemistry there. It was really sweet how they got to sort of address both their insecurities without worrying about necessarily watching somebody's reactions to things. It was largely over text, which I think removes a few barriers. It's not quite the same thing as like talking to somebody and bearing your soul. So I really appreciated that. I appreciated the fact that when they did stumble upon a really big issue, I don't want to spoil the book, but there was quite an issue that happened towards the end. And I love the fact that it wasn't like pushed under the rug, it was properly addressed, and I felt like it was properly solved. So yeah, it was a really good introduction to the series, even though it technically is not the first book. I like to do things in order, but unfortunately, I didn't really expect to. And this is another thing about judging books by their covers. I didn't expect to like it. So for me, I wasn't particularly fussed about starting with the, is it the third book? The third book, because I thought I wasn't gonna like it. Jokes on me because I loved it, and I then went to read the other books. So yeah, it was a really good one for me, and I definitely recommend. Maybe it's not the best in the series, but yeah, it did work for me and I loved it. Next up, I continued with this series and went back. I read the first book, which is called Power Plays and Straight A's, and it's actually between Seth's twin brother, who's called Foster, and Seth's best friend, who's called Zach. They did make brief appearances in book three, but I didn't actually like Foster in book three, which is very interesting because I really liked him in his own book. I thought he was a bit of an asshole, really. I didn't really like Foster in Seth's book, which is interesting. But then in this book, it flipped, and I really like Foster, and I didn't really like Seth. So the book features Seth and Zach. And for me, I didn't really enjoy how, although I understand that it might be complicated for your twin brother to date your best friend, I did feel like Seth overstepped a bit and it got annoying to me. And he did that in his own book. So I'm just like, it's probably just something that he needs to work on. I won't be too hard on him because at the end of the day, I do like Seth, and everybody has their sort of like shortcomings. It's just one of his where he kind of oversteps boundaries sometimes. Um, but ultimately I did like this one. The reason why I like this one slightly better is because both characters actually felt quite original and they weren't your like stereotypical. It's like a jock nerd romance, but it didn't particularly feel too stereotypical. You know, when you read a book and it seems like the author is just going down a checklist of what they think each character should be, and that can get irritating. It wasn't particularly like that. They still had the hallmarks of being like a jock and a nerd, but they felt original. They felt like actual characters. They did not feel like caricatures, which I was very, very happy with. Also, in these romances, I feel like they sometimes flesh out the jock, like the popular one, but all of a sudden they don't put nearly the same amount of effort into the nerd. And I just think it's kind of disrespectful because it's like, just because they're not the most popular member of the school doesn't mean that they're any less of a person. It's just like one is into books and one is into sports, and neither of them are less than. And I love the fact that it really felt that way in this book. Zach actually was, I felt Zach was quite well developed and he was aware of who he was and what he wanted. I love that a large part of his development was him like pushing himself to live his life and not really trying to be anybody else. And I think Foster really helped with that. It very thin line between trying to fundamentally change someone or just trying to encourage them to live to their full potential. And I felt like this is what Foster did for Zach. He wasn't pushing him to become a different person. He was just saying, you know what? You are capable of so many things, and nobody may have told you, but I'm telling you. And I love that Zach really challenged himself without losing his own identity. He felt like a very real person and he wasn't like ashamed of himself, nor did he have any reason to be, really, because I thought he was a great character. I like the fact that he felt very self assured. That I loved. Foster was an absolute sweetheart. I love the fact that he basically he was bisexual, but he wasn't in the closet. If you read love hockey romances, there is this trope of like not being particularly out, which again I wouldn't even blame a character for, because at the end of the day, in the world we live in, we cannot sit here and say that queer people are treated in the same way that heterosexual people are. It's not the truth. And so I understand why a character might want to hide a part of themselves for protection purposes, or maybe because they're still dealing with internalized shame that they could have grown up with. But in this story, Foster is not like that. I really like the fact that everybody at school knew that he was bisexual. He had a bit of a reputation, but he was just unapologetically himself, and it really came across in this book. Like he liked Zach, and he was not about, he didn't have that trope of where like you hide your romance with the nerd. It wasn't anything like that. He was like, I want people to see us together. I want us to go out on dates. I want you to come to my games. I want you to wear my jersey. He's very much proud of who he is and who he loves and who he associates with. And it came across very well. I also love reading about an ambitious character, be it a man or a woman. He was very unapologetically ambitious. He knew exactly where he wanted to go with his career, and he was very clear about it. I loved it because I do consider myself quite an ambitious person, and sometimes people can make you feel a certain kind of way about it. And I love when I read about a character that is just unapologetically ambitious. They're not, stepping on anybody, but they're being clear, like, hey, it's really important to me that I make something of myself professionally. And that's how Foster was. He really wanted to play professionally. And so he was really, really making sure that he followed a certain trajectory to make sure that he put in his best effort to get to where he wanted to go. And I really like that. Zach was very much the same way, because I feel like Zach was very much a scholar, and I think he was in this book, I think he was doing his PhD or master's or something. So Zach is very much in like academia. So they were both like that in terms of like, as much as they had this relationship, they were both working towards their own goals. Zach in academia and Foster in hockey. And I like the fact that it featured very well. I love when it's because it is part of like character identities. Like, what do they love? What are their goals? What are their hopes? And I love when authors are really clear about the goals and the hopes and the dreams of the characters that they write about. And it really came across here. I also love the fact that he didn't come across like Foster was Zach's hero, because that also is when you're like the more experienced character, it almost seems like sometimes they are treated like they're the second coming of like Jesus, and it's like, no, you might be introducing him to things that he didn't know previously, but that doesn't make you a better person. That doesn't make you the better character. It doesn't give you an edge over the person who knew less for whatever reason. And I love the fact that there was a balance. You know what I mean? Like, I felt like they encouraged each other in different ways, and I love that like give and take where they're both pushing each other, but probably in different ways. So I loved Foster for his unreserved personality. He's very just bold about who he is, and it's actually quite inspiring to see somebody that's just so comfortable in standing in who they are. He loved who he loved. He loved what he did. He was passionate. He was fiery, and he was very unapologetic about it. And I love Zach because Zach, to me, was like the definition of quiet confidence. You know what I mean? When somebody is self assured, maybe they're not the noisiest person in the room, but he's very comfortable with who he is and what he does. And just because he's with this like slightly more gregarious person doesn't mean that he's any less of a person, or just because he's learning and picking up new things doesn't necessarily make him less of a person as well. So I love this book slightly more than book 3. I definitely liked the side characters as well. I felt like the hockey team was a really good addition. They didn't really take over, but they were there. So this was really enjoyable. I would say this one was probably a 4 star. I did like it. Wasn't a perfect book, but it was very good, and I definitely enjoyed myself. And so the next book I read was also in the series. It's called Face Offs and Cheap Shots, and that was Jacobs and Beck's book. Jacobs and Beck played with Foster in the hockey team. They're still there. Obviously, Foster's left, but they're still there. They're still obviously university. And I really, really like this one as well. I like this one even. I don't know if I liked it in a different way, in the sense that this one didn't. This one wasn't really emotional. It had its moments, but it was largely really funny. And I feel like there's enough space in the world for not every book has to be super emotional for it to be really good. And this one was quite enjoyable because I absolutely adored Jacobs and Beck's dynamic. They started off not liking each other, more so Jacobs because he was more of the reserved character and he was trying to be captain. Because obviously Foster was the previous captain. And so Jacobs had kind of shadowed Foster in hopes that when Foster left, he could be the captain. And then all of a sudden, it gets to the point where he's in competition with Beck for the captain position, which annoyed him because he felt like Beck was this rich boy who hadn't really needed to work for anything before. And obviously, Jacob comes from a very different background. He has a lovely family, but they're not very well off. He's working, and hockey is very expensive. So for him, he just felt like he's just like, why you have everything handed to you on a silver platter? Why do you also want this role? And he also knew that Beck wasn't passionate about it because it's like Jacobs wanted it because it was his dream, it was his goal, it was something that he had worked for. Beck wanted it more like for vanity reasons. He was a very good player, but he hadn't put in the same effort. And the fact that it annoyed Jacobs kind of fueled him to wanting it more, even though deep down he really didn't. So this book was more so like this book had a more like enemies to lovers dynamic where they were competing in this. So the team draws up these ridiculous challenges for them to compete against each other and eventually pick who's going to be the captain. But yeah, this one was fun. I don't typically enjoy enemies to lovers because I feel like sometimes they delve into unforgivable territory. Some of the books I've read, they do really unforgivable things to each other. And I'm like, I do not know how I'm supposed to believe in this couple when one or both of them have done things that I would never forgive my significant other for. But with this one, it felt good because it was playful and fun, and nobody did anything that I felt was particularly unforgivable, with Eden Finley, who I don't know if I've actually mentioned their name as I've been reviewing these books, but I like the fact that exploration is very much a big part of their books, especially at the age, because she's writing about, people in college. And at that time, you were still, or university, as I call it. It is not that you ever stop discovering who you are, but at that stage, it's a very critical time. And I like the fact that her characters feel like they're figuring things out as they go along. They don't feel like adults who have been living for like 35 years who have their shit together. That's not how it feels. It feels like they're very much discovering each other. And Beck previously didn't think Jacobs definitely, without a doubt, identifies as gay. But Beck had never been attracted to someone of the same gender before. So this was his very first time to the fact that he was queer. And I like the fact that the book ended, it didn't particularly end with an answer, because sometimes that also you might feel, sometimes maybe authors feel pressure to have a label at the end of the book. And I love the fact that for Beck, it very much was like he's discovered himself, he's accepted himself, but he doesn't particularly know what he is because it's very new for him. And I like the fact that it wasn't particularly wrapped up in a very neat bow. I think that to me added to the charm of it. So I definitely enjoyed this one, maybe even slightly more than the first one I read. So this was book two. So if I had to rank my favorites, I would say book one was my favorite, and then book two, and then book three. I would say that's probably my ranking of this series. I didn't finish the series because I got series fatigue. I don't know if anybody ever experiences this, but do you know when you're reading a series, and even though it might be good, you're just not very interested in the future books? Does that happen to anyone, or is it just me? Do you get series fatigue, especially when there's a lot of books? It's different if they have like maybe like five books and the series has ended. Whereas I feel like if it's ongoing, I feel, I don't know, maybe I don't know how to describe it. Like I almost want to go and read something else and maybe potentially come back to it if I felt like it. But I didn't feel like proceeding any further, even though that there are other books. So if you have read the books, would you advise me to continue? What happens next with the other characters? I've read book one to three and not anything else. So obviously if you'd like me to continue, if you think it's worth continuing, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to take your recommendations. But yeah, it was a really, really good series and I enjoyed myself very much. It was definitely my first, like, maybe not my first, because I did read The Long Game before this. So I was still in my introductory phase into hockey queer romance. And I honestly, I had a really good time. So I'm really, really thankful that I discovered this. It's been amazing. Next up, I went into another series. It's called Shots on Net. I'd been seeing this on my Kindle Unlimited like browsing ideas page, so I decided to give it a shot. It has a really nice cover and everything, and it's by JJ Mulder. And it's about these two guys called Zeke and Carter. So Zeke is looking for a house. So he basically lives off campus now and he's moved out of his granny's home. And so he's looking for a house. He's lucky to get this offer of this guy called Carter. And then they meet. And Carter is really lovely. I know he doesn't really, he's a bit stoic at first, but he's such a lovely guy. He gives him a good deal. He's like, because Carter was born into like a really wealthy family, so he had this entire house that he really wasn't interested in living in by himself. And obviously he gets like a message from Zeke and then he gives him this generous offer. He obviously sees that Zeke is not quite as well off, so he obviously Zeke pays rent, but then he's like, I'll carry on the rest, you don't have to worry too much about it, which I thought was really sweet right off the bat. So even though Carter was quite a prickly character, he was very, very, you could tell he was prickly, but he was fundamentally a good person. And that's what I really like about characters that are not so like sunshiny. It's like, yeah, they may not be so gregarious, but at the end of the day, you see little signs that they are really good people. And I really like that about Carter. He was the one that fell first. He was quite angry because his parents are quite, he's the only child of his parents. His parents are your typical, like, unsupportive, treats their child like some kind of extension of them kind of parent. So he grew up very angry, understandably so. And so he really loves hockey, but he's really grappling with the fact that he doesn't have a future in hockey because his father expects him to come back and work in the company. And obviously, he meets Zeke, and Zeke is this really lovely guy, and they form a really close bond. Zeke, because Carter has been obviously so kind to him, Zeke is also really kind himself. He starts cooking for Carter, and then they start just genuinely hanging out, and then it turns, romantic, which was really sweet. It was a really slow burn, really sweet romance. It's not anything that particularly stands out to me in terms of all the books that I've read. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites, but I truly enjoyed it for what it was. It was a truly lovely book. It was lovely to see the way it developed. One of the cutest moments was when Carter had invited Zeke out on a date, and Zeke didn't realize that it was a date. So he kind of said, "Oh, can we go to this party after?" Not really realizing. So his friend was like, "No, that was a date. He wants to go on a date with you." And obviously he apologized. And yeah, it was really sweet. I can't say too much about it, but I really, really loved it. It was really lovely. Would I reread it? I'm not sure, but I guess you don't have to reread something for it to be enjoyable. It's not one of my reread kind of books, but I enjoyed it for what it was, definitely. And I don't have too much to say about it. But yeah, it's a really sweet book. If you want something that's very like, it has angst, but I would say it's probably on the lower end, and it's especially on like one character's end as opposed to both. The angst isn't necessarily on the relationship; it's more so on outside factors. Like, it was mostly on Carter's struggles and the fact that he was going through a lot personally. And it wasn't too much. There wasn't a lot of drama. It basically was the perfect book to counterbalance the chaos that was my life at that time, and I really, really enjoyed it. So yeah, if you're looking for a hockey romance that is quite like low angst and like slow burn and really sweet, really beautiful, I would definitely recommend this one. The next book was also in the CU Hockey series by JJ Mulder, and this was Save the Game. And this was the book between Max and Luke. So if you read the first book, you would know that Max is actually one of Carter's teammates, and they become friendly over the course of the book. And Zeke is very perceptive, so he tells Carter to try and talk to Max because to him, it was quite obvious that Max had been going through something. So he said, let's try and invite Max to places and make sure you talk to him because it looks like he's grappling with something that he perhaps is not very comfortable talking about just yet. And so they become friends. So this book is about him and who he eventually starts dating, called Luke. Can I just start by saying this book is extremely emotional? It's of the two books, this is probably my favorite. And even now, talking about it, I can feel my emotions rush to the surface because it was a very serious. I don't want to spoil the book, and I don't think that what Max went through is in the blurb, so I don't want to spoil it for you. I will say that what he went through is probably one of the most traumatic things that could ever happen to somebody. And it happened when he was unconscious, which is an added layer of how disgusting the act was. And obviously, trigger warning if you've ever been through this. I liked this book because it focused on a topic you don't hear a lot about in general, but especially with men. And it's a very real thing. And honestly, I've never been so pissed off with something in my life the way that it unfolded. If I was going to have any complaints about this book, it was the way that Luke found out about what happened wasn't from Max, it was from somebody else who should not have known what happened because they were not a part of it at all. And it was a betrayal of confidence between the person who handled it and the person who found out and then told Luke. So that part really pissed me off, and it didn't particularly help that that wasn't addressed. The fact that that betrayal of confidence wasn't properly addressed, and there was no sort of like recourse for it, because I felt it was quite bad. All in all, I loved the dynamic between Luke and Max. With reference to the trauma, I don't know if it's an accurate portrayal because I've never been through it, but for me, it felt very real. And it felt tastefully and respectfully done, which is probably I think the most important thing when you're handling subject matter of this magnitude, you can't really joke around about it. You have to make it real, knowing that the people who have gone through this will read it. And you don't want, on top of the trauma of having gone through something like this, you don't want them to feel like you're making fun of it. Because, what really is the point if you do that? So I like the fact that it felt respectful and it felt tastefully done. Max and Luke were the sweetest couple. They meet in a diner because Luke works in a diner. Luke plays football, Max plays hockey. So they kind of vaguely know each other because they run in the same like sports circles, but they're not overtly familiar with each other because they play different sports and they're both quite time consuming in conjunction with the fact that they are also in university. So they don't really know each other too well. And Luke was such a sweet character. I love the way that he just blatantly flirted with Max because Max was going through a stage where he hadn't fallen out with his best friend. But the thing is, the thing that happened, his best friend is going through a lot of guilt of having not been able to save him or prevent it from happening. Even though if you read the book, you know that there was no way that the best friend could have saved him. It was just one of the circumstances. But they're going through a bit of a rough patch because Max is obviously still reeling from the fact that this thing happened to him, and his best friend is being a bit like overprotective and almost like policing him, which I'm sure was not really intentional. It's just the added weight of having been there and not being able to stop what happened. And so they're going through a bit of a stage where they're walking on eggshells around each other, and Max is just kind of looking for somebody to treat him like it didn't happen. Nothing to this magnitude has ever happened to me, but if I think about some of the times in my life when I felt quite vulnerable, and you've told obviously your close friends and your close family, sometimes you crave people who don't really know about what happened, because sometimes when you love somebody and you care about somebody, you do maybe sometimes unintentionally treat them with kid gloves. And while it's nice to be sensitive to people and the things that they've experienced, sometimes you just want people to treat them like it hasn't happened to them. And I think that's what Luke provided for Max. He didn't initially know what happened to Max. So he's just really like flirting with him and trying to bring him out of his shell. And it was so cute to see their relationship. Their relationship started off really like jokey, and then it turned romantic. I love the fact that Luke really went out of his way to make Max feel special and wanted. And I love the fact that they drew comfort from one another. I loved how they solved their disputes because eventually, Luke tells Max that he knows about this thing that has happened. And obviously, when you read, if you know what happened, you understand how I feel like Max's reaction was extremely justified. It's like his privacy was invaded and he felt cornered. I love how they worked it out at the end. And I love that they were able to come together again because they were truly the highlights of each other's lives at that point. And so I really like the fact that they were able to come together. They've actually ended up being one of my favorite couples I've ever read about, which I think is really sweet. The found family with Carter and Zeke and Vaz. I didn't mention Vaz in the other book. Vaz is Carter's best friend, and they have this little found family now that all of them are friends. When Carter meets Luke, he gives him a bit of a hard time. That's very much Carter's kind of personality. It was kind of annoying, but I love the fact that Max had somebody in his corner that was like, listen, if you hurt my friend, we're going to have issues. And that was kind of what Carter was for Max. And I love that. It was a really funny scene when they all met. Max's relationship with Coach Mackenzie and like his partner Tony was really sweet. This book really will trigger your emotions positively and maybe negatively. It just filled my heart to know that he had these people that he could go to talk about. And I just wish that, first of all, I wish that such things did happen to people, because like, just why? But since we can't control when these things happen to people, I just wish people could have a safe space where they could go to people in the way that Max was able to go to Coach Mackenzie and Tony, and really express himself and have people in his corner. It was really, really sweet. And I love the fact that it felt like light at the end of the tunnel when he started developing relationships with all these people that would eventually end up in his corner and supporting him and loving him. I would look up the trigger warnings before giving this book a read, but I think it's very necessary. It tackles a subject matter that I don't really see a lot in books, that I think we as a society could do better acknowledging and trying to help prevent. I liked the first book, but I loved this one. It was one of those things where I needed to take a few days away from reading. You know, when you read a book and you need to take a few days to think about what you've read. It was one of those books for me. It was a truly beautiful book and I highly, highly recommend. It was so sweet. I gave this one 4 stars. It would have been a 5 if the ending had been better, because I felt like the ending was a bit clumsy. and if they had properly addressed Max's invasion of privacy, but they didn't. So I did end up rating it a 4 star. But it was a brilliant book, and I would read it again. I have read it again, and it's really sweet. Gosh, I love a book about a couple that just, they genuinely just adore each other, and they do everything they can to make the other person happy, to make the other person feel seen and valued. It's a kind of relationship that I would wish on myself or my best friend. And yeah, Max and Luke were the sweetest, and I highly recommend this book for sure. Speaking of JJ Mulder and hockey romances, because I enjoyed those books so much, I decided to see if they had written anything else. And imagine my shock when I discovered that there was an entire series before this one. So, also going back to my newly developed habit of reading in a very disorganized fashion, there was actually a series before the SCU hockey one, and it's called Offsides. And it actually features Coach Mackenzie, his partner, and their circle of friends. So I went straight into that one. I didn't have any series fatigue. Can you imagine? You love to see it. So with this one, I did start from book one. This book features relationship between Sam and Troy. This one I really liked. Sam used to play hockey in college, and his career gets derailed. Basically, he had planned to play professional hockey, but something happens to make it impossible. So he's still dealing with the fact that his dreams were basically taken away from him. He's also dealing with the fact that he's just gone through like a breakup. And then obviously he starts working for a hockey team, which Troy plays for. So it's a bit sticky in the sense that he's still kind of working in the industry he always wanted to, but with a completely different role. And so he meets Troy, who is this like ray of sunshine. He's very passionate about hockey. He's the kind of person that needs to be, he's very energetic, he's very happy, he's very sunshiny. And so they really balance each other out in that way, where Sam is a bit more serious. And then Troy has this really brilliant, group of friends that consist of Tony, who I talked about in the previous book, and Corwin, and he's very close to them. By the way, a big part of this series that I love is the found family and the male friendships. Because again, we do romance books, we don't really talk about a friendship between a group of men. And the friendships between Troy, Cohen, and Tony, and then when they brought in Sam eventually, their relationships are so sweet, and it's like they genuinely support each other, and they found this family outside of their families. Some of them don't come from the best families, but they have this really sweet dynamic as friends, and they're affectionate with each other, and it's very clear that they love each other. And I just thought it was really sweet. Sam didn't eventually comes out as bisexual. He didn't think he was bisexual. I think he also thought he was straight. He'd never been attracted to a man before, so this was this was his first time being attracted to a man, being in a relationship with a man. Whereas Troy had always been gay, he'd always been out as well. For him, being gay is just a fact, like how it should be for other people. He's never hidden it. It's never been a problem for him. I loved Sam's sister June. She was really funny. I think, yeah, if you like that whole like trope about like siblings like taking jabs at each other, you'd love this one as well. That said, the story did feel a bit choppy at times, and I wish it ended better. The author has a really funny way of ending books that I don't really like, and it's a pity because she has such likable characters. And also there was drama at the end with his ex-girlfriend that I just felt took up space that it did need to be, especially because it didn't particularly add or subtract. It subtracted from the plot, but it didn't add to it. And that's also like one of those things where it's like we could have really done without it, to be fair. Instead of doing that, we could have just had more on page time with Troy and Sam. So that kind of annoyed me. While I did enjoy it, I don't think it's a book that I probably will go back to, but it was a nice start. And I think I did see that this was her first book. So I'm gonna give grace for that. A first book is rarely ever will it be perfect, just like my first YouTube video that you've probably watched. So I like to give grace for people's first books. She's probably still, exploring herself, but as far as a first book goes, it was more than decent, and I really enjoyed myself. And it's great because even though it didn't end perfectly, and even though I had my problems, it still made me want to read the other books, which can only be a compliment to the author. So yeah. Continuing on with the Offside series, I read the next book, which is called Square to the Puck, and it features Corwin, who is the captain of Troy's team, and Nigel, who gets transferred to their team. And I have to say, I think I might be a very sappy romance reader. Like I finally come to the conclusion that I like a romance book that really like that I like romances that really tug at my heartstrings, and this one did. this one was even better than the first one. I really liked Corwin from the first book. He's very close friends with Troy and Anthony, and he has like a very mother hen kind of like personality. There wasn't a lot that we found out about him, but we did know that he's the captain of the team, so he's very much the leader. He's always trying to get the team together, like for holidays and things. He'll make sure like people who aren't going home for the holidays come over to his. He's constantly like cooking for the team. He's very like very domestic goddess vibes about him, so it was nice to see that there was a book about him. So it starts off when he was really young. He had a run-in with this guy called Nigel St. James, and it didn't end very well. And then all of a sudden, Nigel gets transferred to Corwin's team and they meet again. This book was Corwin has trigger warning because Corwin has been through abuse of his own. And there's I don't know. For me, I find it very difficult to, I'm not a parent, but it sometimes you read about the abuse that parents inflict on their children and you're just like how could you do that? But on the child side, that's why when I see people who were horrifically treated by their parents and then they somehow end up being good people, I'm always in awe because I'm like, you had every excuse to not end up like this. And the fact that you've ended up completely differently, you've actually won. Your parents are bloody losers and you are an amazing person for ending up being such a remarkable person despite the fact that you really could have gone the other way because your parents are horrific. So that's what happened with Cohen. Cohen is dealing with the fact that he's gay, but his parents are not accepting and they've abused him for it. And so he's very, I don't know if stunted is the right word to use, but he hasn't had a chance to figure out himself or his life because he's always been ashamed because he was made to feel ashamed of the fact that he was gay. And that attributed to why his first encounter with Nigel was so bad. It was because of Nigel wasn't exactly the sweetest during it. He was a bit of an asshole, but not too much that it was unforgivable. But also he didn't know the background. Whereas Corwin was operating from a complete lack of self-confidence and it just didn't end well. So when their reunion happened, I think how many years later? Maybe like 6. And there is a bit of an age gap between them also. And I think was feeling very guilty about it. So when he did have a chance to talk to Corwin, he like apologized and was like, I'm so sorry for our first meeting. And then Corwin had an opportunity to be like, this is why I reacted the way that I reacted. What I loved most about this book is the fact that Nigel, even though he didn't have the best first impression to me based on their first meeting, complete 180. He was so patient with Corwin. He moved at a pace. He just wanted to be with Cohen in any way, shape, or form, whether it eventually turned romantic or not. But I think he just wanted Cohen in his life, however he could get him. And I kind of like that trope. I think it's really sweet where you can tell that the person just wants the other person in their life. It doesn't matter if maybe it's not precisely the way that they had envisioned, but it's just like, I want you in my life and I will do everything I can to keep you in it. And that was what this book was. Nigel was so patient and kind and loving. And Cohen, Cohen is such a sweet guy. And I love the fact that the thing about Cohen is that he's constantly taking care of other people. He's constantly looking after other people. So for Nigel to have come into his life and done what Cohen does for other people for Cohen, I was very happy with it. I was like, this is amazing. It was nice to just see somebody else take care of Cohen because Cohen is constantly taking care of other people. The age gap thing was a bit unnecessary. It felt like a bit of an unnecessary plot device. I feel like we could have done without it. It didn't really need to be mentioned as much as it did. Some people might read this book and think that Nigel gave a bit too much, but I think I'm okay with that dynamic because at the end of the day, it didn't cover an extremely long timeline. And I feel like relationships grow and evolve. So even if it might come across that Nigel was a bit, I don't know how you would explain it, it was maybe a bit too magnanimous. I do think that it made sense for where they were in that stage. It had only been like, I think the book only spanned a couple of months. So at the end of the day, I feel like when you're in a relationship with somebody that has been through the kind of trauma that Cohen has, I feel like as a person who may not have, sometimes it's good to hold space for people who have gone through trauma like that. And like, I don't know if I'm explaining myself particularly well, but I feel like it made sense that Nigel was that way because at the end of the day, it does take time to come out of all that shame that Cohen had for over 20 years. Things like that do take time. So for me, I didn't really have a problem with that dynamic. I'll never stop talking about the found family between the boys. It is pretty much as good as the romance, and I love family. I love found family. I love friendship, and this book really does friendship well. And I love to see friendship between men because, again, it's not really something that you see too much in real life and in books. So to see these men that are very much in each other's corners, very much there for each other, it was amazing to see. I don't really like an epilogue generally, but if you're gonna have an epilogue, please can it focus on the couple, because this epilogue did not really. It was kind of a sneak peek of the other book, which I wasn't necessarily a fan of, because I feel like it took away from Nigel and Cohen's story, and it doesn't help that the author does seem to have an ending problem, and the plot is not the strongest. So when you combine a plot that's not too strong and has some holes, and you combine it with a not so satisfactory ending, as well as an epilogue that doesn't feel like it focuses a lot on the couple, it's just a lot. Like, this book could have been everything to me, which, so it kind of pisses me off, because I'm like, this book could really have been everything, because I am in love with the couple. I'm in love with their friendship. I love what's going on. It's just these little things that make it take a sour away each time. But still, I have reread it, so it's not. It's we can acknowledge the problems while still understanding that it's a book with an amazing amount of promise, and it features characters that are so lovable that they warm their way into your heart, and it was very good. I loved them together, and I love their dynamic. I love seeing people win who may have previously felt that they've lost everything or didn't have particularly the best start to life. To see them grow up to win later on in life is always, I think, is always satisfactory. I'm always kind of rooting for an underdog. So that's kind of my thing. I love when they get to experience love that they deserve, or love that they should have been introduced to but they didn't get. To see them get it later on is always extremely gratifying, I think, and I love this book so much. And then the next book I read, also by JJ Mulder and in the Offsides series, was Between the Pipes. And that's actually Coach Mackenzie's story with Anthony, which I really, really loved. I want to, because I loved Anthony from the previous books. And so I was curious about what his book would look like, because he was such a likable character from previous books. Not only this one, but also SCU Hockey, because he did show up for Max, and he was one of Carter's heroes. So he featured in the other series as well as the previous books. So Anthony was a character I was very curious about, because I loved him in all the books he appeared in. He's an incredibly likable character. He's very funny. He's very gregarious. You can't help but notice him, even if the book is not about him. He's one of those characters. And I think usually they tend to pair characters like this with characters like Coach Mackenzie, who are, a bit quieter. So Coach Mackenzie has become a coach because he was forced to end his career early because he sustained quite significant injuries that led to him not being able to play anymore. And I don't want to say miserable, because at the end of the day, I feel like it's kind of justified. Like, people should be allowed to mourn the fact that they might not live the dream that they had for themselves. Well, he's in a space where he's really negative, and Anthony is like this ball of joy. So Anthony comes in and really messes up his world, because he doesn't allow him to sit in the misery. He's kind of like poking him, trying to get like reactions out of him. And the interesting thing about this book is that Anthony, previous to this, actually thought he was straight. Again, it's kind of a discovery book where this is the first time he's ever been attracted to a man, and I thought it was really well done. I adored Anthony and Nico's development. I enjoyed reading Nico trying his best to dislike Anthony and like failing. It was one of those books where Nico is Coach Mackenzie. I'm sorry if I'm confusing you. Nico was fully prepared to hate Anthony, and Anthony was giving him no chance to do that. Like, Anthony's kind of character where if you hate him, you're the problem. That kind of man. So Nico really did try to push him away, but it just wasn't happening, because Anthony is really warm and he wanted a relationship with Nico. So he made sure that he was in his space. Anthony was actually recovering from an injury himself. So he had been called to help to coach. He was basically called to be like an assistant coach and to help with the boys. So he was basically in their space all the time. One of my favorite tropes in a book is when one of the characters finds out like a passion of the other person. Like, and Nico finds out that Anthony does art, and he's like, his reaction to it was very sweet, and they were really lovable, and it was lovely just to see like the way that they started. And I loved to see like the development of vulnerability between characters because Nico was very closed off. There was a particular point where he asked Anthony if he could take him to the hospital for reasons that you'll know if you read the book. And it was just that kind of character development that really makes a book worth it, where he's like, Nico would never have asked Anthony earlier in the books. And that was a really, really defining moment. It's actually one of my gripes in this book that we didn't actually get to see Anthony take him for that appointment, because I felt like it was such an integral part of the story. Like, he had got to a point where he actually felt comfortable asking Anthony for something like that, and then we didn't get to see it. And I was just like, oh, I was so annoyed with it. So again, with this author, it's kind of like the pacing is just a bit choppy and a bit just clumsy. Each book kind of finishes with me being dissatisfied, and it really hurts because I really love these characters. I don't know if you understand the feeling of absolutely adoring certain characters, absolutely adoring the potential of a book, and then being disappointed because it wasn't properly executed. It's just like, it could be a 5-star, it could be a 6-star, but like certain things went wrong. As always, I love seeing the boys, their friendship. I said it before, I'll keep saying it. I don't know if saying if it was tested is the right way, but there was a moment where they all had to come together. And again, that friendship that just carries these books, it's just so, I'm like, if everybody had a friendship group like that, I feel like we'd all be so much happier. It's just, they're there for each other. And found family is something I love. I absolutely love, because I'm like, sometimes the people who end up meaning the most to you are not people you're blood related to. Sometimes they're people that you will meet by chance. And to think that they could end up being the way that these guys are to each other, is the friendship is probably the best. Apart from the romance, the friendships, they really, really anchor the books in a way that I just love. I also loved Anthony's relationships with Carter and Vass. It was nice to see them pop up, because obviously this book would have happened before Carter's book. So it was nice to actually see how Carter was prior to Zeke. It was really interesting to see how Carter was, and his anger, his previous anger. It was nice to have like a bit of backstory as to why he was the way he was. That was quite nice. But yeah, it was such a sweet book, and I just wish it was better executed. But it's just one of those books that I think I'll keep coming back, because I feel like I'm a character driven reader, and it's the reason why I could potentially pick a book that has characters I love so much over a book. It just feels hypocritical to say, because I'm kind of complaining about the plot, but at the end of the day, those characters, they really do carry a book in a way that you can sort of forgive certain things, because the characters just imprint themselves into your heart. And I think that book, it was because of that this book really excelled to me. I really love the characters. Nico took a while to get used to, but at the end of the day, I understood, because I feel like if I had gone through what Nico had, I probably might be the same way. And even from an empathetic standpoint, it's just like, yeah, if your dreams were taken away from you, you'd be, especially in the way that it was, I'd understand. I just wish we'd had more. I wish it was better explored. I wish we had had more time to really have more on page time with Nico and Anthony, and it felt a bit less choppy. But all in all, I really enjoyed it, and I've gone back to read it, so that does say something about the promise that this author has. And I think I'll just keep on reading their books, because they have a knack for creating extremely lovable characters, and that's really what carries these books through, I think. And then the very last book, guys, I was very shocked I didn't have any series fatigue. And I actually went on to read the last book in this series. And it's called From Coast to Coast. And it's about Remy and Grayson. Grayson made a very brief appearance in book one, because he's very close to Troy. They grew up together, and so they have that very close relationship. Grayson lives quite far away, so they don't really have an opportunity to see each other very often. But when they do see each other and when they do speak, their closeness really comes through. I really like this book. I particularly loved the dynamic between Grayson. Grayson is on a team that is extremely homophobic. Basically, he's caught between a rock and a hard place, because he loves where he lives. He lives where he's from, and he loves his job, but he's stuck with this team that is just the most disgusting team you could be on as a queer person. And they're, constantly sabotaging him. So even though he's a good player, but they sabotage him in a way that he's not used to the best of his abilities, which then impedes other teams from kind of poaching him, because they're not seeing him for all that he's capable of. And then in comes Remy, who is going through a divorce and going through a bit of an identity crisis. And he's kind of grappling with the fact that he had been married to somebody who on paper would have been absolutely perfect for him, but for whatever reason it didn't work. And he was just trying to grapple with the fact that he wasn't able to have this passionate, love affair, long-standing marriage with his best friend, because they were best friends and they just lost that spark. Or actually, as it turns out, they didn't really have the spark. It was kind of like a marriage of convenience in a way, but not quite. And so he's dealing with the divorce, and this book is very exploratory on Remy's end, because Remy is exploring, maybe even though the default thing is to think of yourself as heterosexual, it might not be the case. He ends up being really attracted to Grayson. Remy is very like, he's your poster California boy, very like free, almost like hippie, and his mom is the same. By the way, his relationship with his mom was absolutely beautiful. He has probably one of the best mother-son dynamics I've ever read in a book. It's very sweet. And he's very like, he says whatever comes to his mind. He's a bit quirky, in a way that a lot of people don't write guys in books. So I really liked him. Grayson was so sweet. He was such a cinnamon roll. He was such a caretaker as well. It was a pity that he was on such a disgusting team, because he really was such a lovely guy. So to see them, band together and have a really beautiful relationship was very, very sweet. Remy did slightly annoy me sometimes, but not enough to really derail my enjoyment of the book. And I didn't really like when they were separated, because eventually Grayson does get a contract somewhere else. And I feel like there was a lot of page time wasted on the amount of time they spent separated. I feel like they could really have been together, but understandably, it was all right. This was probably, I think, the most fleshed out book in the series, which is interesting, even though it didn't end up being my favorite. Which again, I'm like, I feel a bit hypocritical, because I've talked about like choppiness. This didn't feel quite as choppy, but there were still like existing problems. Eventually, everybody improves in their cross. This one wasn't my favorite, but I fully enjoyed it. I love that we got insights into Remy's relationship with his best friend Alex. I love that Troy made an appearance, because it's quite obvious that Grayson loves Troy a lot, and they have a really good bond. It was nice to see the whole group together at the end of the book, because I like I said, I love this group. So they were there in a way that didn't particularly take away from the book, but was still very sweet. I love Zolkov as well. He was Grayson's teammate, Russian teammate. He was very funny. He reminded me of Ilya from The Long Game and Heated Rivalry. And they have that a bit of a similar, not just being Russian, but in terms of like their personalities and the way that they talk. I wish there was a little bit more about Grayson's background and his own relationship with his family, because it did feel like he wasn't particularly fleshed out in the same way that Remy was. I feel like we could have dedicated a bit less time on their separation, a bit more, delved more into Grayson. He didn't really feel very fleshed out, even though I really liked him. The series as a whole I liked. Obviously, I have my problems, but it didn't really stop me from enjoying them. And if I had to rank them, I would put, I think I would put Corwin and Nigel's book first. I think I would put Nico and Anthony's book second. I put this one third, which was Grayson and Remy's book, and I put Sam and Troy's book fourth. They're very enjoyable, but it made me realize that it's actually just now that I'm sitting here recording this video that I'm thinking to myself, wow, I'm really a character driven reader, because you could argue that the fourth book was actually the best book, but because I don't know, it's hard to say. I think the middle books really did hit me emotionally. Maybe it was because of where I was in life at the time. I really, really wanted something that felt emotional. I was gonna like shred my heart into pieces and put it back. So I think that's probably why those two books hit differently. But as a whole, I give it 4 stars, even though sometimes my ratings do kind of vary between each book. But as a whole, like it's a strong, and considering it's JJ Mulder's first series, definitely holds a lot of promise. I'm actually looking forward to reading. Vas has a book coming out very soon, I think next month, and I will definitely be getting my hands on that, because Vas was a character I really liked from. That's Carter's best friend, and I really liked him when I read his book. So I'm very much looking forward to reading that. So, guys, thank you so much for tuning in again. I'm really still getting used to the pace of recording videos and actually talking about the books that I've read. It's a bit difficult because, in many ways, I know how I feel, but I have this, sort of nagging feeling that I'm not portraying the books in the way that I would love to. But all in all, I hope that you've learned something from this video. If you've read the books, I would love to know what you thought of them. If you have more recommendations for me, that'd be amazing, because I still feel kind of new to the whole like the hockey romance, the male. And if anything, I think discovering these books have made me realize that, because you do see a lot of arguments when you see like content creators and why they don't read certain books, and they always say, oh, well, I can't relate. You don't particularly have to relate to people to enjoy a story. And I think that's what I found with these books. You could have completely nothing in common with people and still enjoy their stories. And for me, these male romances are a nice reprieve from male and female, because male and female have been feeling like one and the same lately. I don't know if I'm the only one who's been struggling, because I feel like they're all kind of morphing into the same books and it's a bit exhausting at times. So it's nice to read something completely different. And I feel like there's generally a lot less power imbalance between a book about two men. The male female, there's always kind of like this power imbalance that like really irks me. And then it's almost like kind of like the woman tends to be a bit more sacrificial. It's just, for me, male female romance books at the moment, unless they change or unless they're different from what we've been getting thus far, they are starting to slightly bore me. I don't know if I'm the only one. It's just a bit same, you know what I mean? So it's been nice to discover these books while simultaneously taking a break from romance that just started to feel a bit stale. But yeah, if you have any recommendations for me, please put them down below. I will try my very best to interact with all the comments. I'm still trying to figure out how I do have an Instagram account, but I'm still trying to figure out how to go about making content for it, because it's a slightly different format and I'm still not at a place where I feel comfortable with the pace of YouTube quite yet. So if you have any tips for me, please let me know. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. Thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you for being so kind. I really appreciate it. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.